Greetings and guten Abend from Alexandria, Virginia. My name is Daniel Blier. Welcome to a very special presentation of World War II and Cold War history in Northern Virginia, featuring two very special and distinguished guest speakers. Michael Warner and Jörn Happel, thank you both so much for being with us. We're so grateful and lucky to have you. The format of today's program will be as follows. First, my colleague, Melissa Weih, will introduce Michael Warner. Professor Warner will then speak for 20 minutes. Then I will introduce Jörn Happel. Professor Happel will then speak for 20 minutes. The remainder of our time together will be spent answering questions from you, the audience. If you have a question, please type it into Zoom's chat feature.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Weih, and I'm a park ranger at Prince William Forest Park in Triangle, Virginia. From 1942 to 1945, agents of the Office of Strategic Services, otherwise known as the OSS, used Prince William Forest Park as a training ground, learning skills such as radio communications, cryptography, and Morse code at Area C on the east side of the park, and special operations and munitions at Area A on the west side of the park. I'm here today to introduce Michael Warner, Command Historian at United States Cyber Command. When working as a historian at the Central Intelligence Agency in the early 2000s, he became interested in OSS history and was able to meet and speak with many former OSS agents. This culminated in the publication of the Office of Strategic Services, America's first intelligence agency. Michael Warner has written and lectured on intelligence history, theory, and reform. He's also the author of The Rise and Fall of Intelligence, an International Security History, published in 2014, and the co-author of The Use of the Force for State Power, History and Future, published in 2020. Please welcome Michael Warner.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Thank you very much for that. And good afternoon to everyone out there. OSS is a fascinating topic.
Sir, you're muted.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Button on your microphone.
How about now? Is this good now? Am I still muted?
We can hear you.
We can? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. All right. So thank you very much for having me here today. Good afternoon to everyone. And as Melissa said, I did get interested in OSS history when I could still talk with OSS veterans. There were still a few in the building at the CIA where I was working at the time as an historian. And I just do want to add one little note here, and just to say that I am still working for the U.S. government, and these are my own views that I'm about to express, not those of the U.S. government or any of its agencies here. So to understand OSS is a very odd creature. It only exists for about 4 years. And it comes out of very particular historical circumstances, which is to say, the way in which World War II began. Of course, what happened was Hitler invaded Poland after signing a pact with the Soviet Union in August of 1939. He invades Poland in September 1939, takes over in April of the next year. He invades Scandinavia, takes over Denmark, takes over Norway. In May, he invades the Low Countries, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, invades France. And shockingly, he beats the French in about 6 weeks. The French capitulate by mid-June. And suddenly we are in a situation where the only country really left against Hitler here is Britain. And Hitler controls the coast of Europe from the Arctic Circle down to the Pyrenees Mountains. And America looked at this and reacted with horror. America was just traumatized by this experience here. I'm going to show you a quick. I'm going to share my screen with you here. Hold on a second. It worked before. Allow that, and I can make this bigger. So this is the situation here. All the red in the pink, that is all controlled by Germany, Nazi Germany. The green portions are the sort of quasi-ally of the Germans at this time. Remember, the Germans and the Soviets are not fighting yet. And so Germany really has nothing to stop it on the east. It only has Britain on the west. And if the Americans are looking at this and they're saying, if the Germans if they want to invade Spain, they could probably take that over. And of course, the Spanish are a little bit questionable here, because the Spanish had been this is Franco's Spain, and they had bought a lot of arms from Germany and Mussolini's Italy in the Spanish Civil War. Down into France, who's running North Africa? That's French North Africa there, where there's a big French army there. But what is their loyalty? They are loyal to Vichy, the sort of puppet government that's left in the rump of France that the Germans have not occupied yet. What is their loyalty? Well, if you've seen the movie Casablanca, you know how that ends there. You don't find out the loyalty of them until the last scene of the movie. And so because of this, President Franklin Roosevelt realizes that America could very soon be in a situation where Hitler controls almost the entire eastern coast of the Atlantic, and war with Germany is going to be inevitable. And so what he has to do is move the United States into an alliance with England. But he can't do it because America is officially by law neutral at the time. And a lot of Americans are somewhat isolationist in the way they look at things. So he has to do two things very quickly. He has to figure out, if we get into an alliance with the British, what will happen? The British just helped lose the war in France in 1940. And so if we give them arms, are they going to be able to use these arms capably? Also, how does he get America pulled into this? How does he start, if the British are capable? Can he get the British? Can we help the British in some way? And so what he does is he has an ambassador in England, Joseph P. Kennedy, who has some very famous teenage sons and daughters, but he doesn't trust that ambassador. So he sends another emissary to England, and that is William J. Donovan, the fellow here on the right side of this picture. That's in his World War I uniform there. Here's Roosevelt. Here is Churchill. Donovan goes to England, meets with Churchill, meets with the British, and comes back from this semi-secret mission and explains that, yes, the British can do it. They can fight on. They're not just going to collapse. We've got to find some way to help them. And Roosevelt is very pleased with this. Who is this Donovan character here? This is William J. Donovan. He's a war hero in World War I, and you can look at that picture from, I think it's September of 1918, and you just get an idea of the character of the man. He likes what he's doing here. He gets several medals in World War I.
So,
including, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. So if you could, we're still looking at the map of Europe. If you could maybe at the top hit the start slideshow button.
Still looking at the map of Europe. Well, it's scrolling forward on my screen.
Oh, I see.
So I'm trying to figure out why it's not scrolling forward for you. Because the last time, now can you see it?
No.
You have it now? Okay. Well, that's okay. Let me go back here. All right, stop sharing. We just tested this before and it worked. So I am a little bit confused as to why this doesn't work this time. All right. Give me a second. Now all I get is you can't see that, can you? Is that good?
It's still on the, oh, here, for a minute it was good.
How's that? What are you seeing now?
I'm seeing still kind of zoomed out on the other slides. Like it still is, the presentation mode hasn't started quite yet.
Oh, that is so strange.
Maybe what we can do if it would
You
help.
know
Is
what
the
I
lower...
can do? Okay, how's that? You can, how's that there?
Oh, I think that would work fine. Yeah.
All right. Well, I apologize for that. We
Oh,
had
no
this thing
apologies. No
working.
worries at all. I'm sorry to
All
interrupt you.
right. Okay. Donovan goes to England. He comes back and he tells Roosevelt, this can work. We can, if we give arms to the British, they know what to do with them here. And they're going to fight on, as the Battle of Britain proves. Roosevelt basically moves the United States into a quasi-secret alliance with England. Here he is meeting with Prime Minister Churchill on the deck of the HMS Prince of Wales at the Atlantic Conference in August of 1941. And what the Americans and the British do is they come up with a strategy to beat Hitler, because eventually Roosevelt knows America is going to be pulled into this war. So what they're going to do when they get into the war, they're going to blockade Europe, sort of cut off Hitler's access to the rest of the world. They're going to bomb Germany. They're going to work toward invading the continent so they can beat the German army. But before then, before they're ready to invade, they're going to launch covert action. They're going to launch special operations, sabotage, subversion, propaganda, and things like that. The Americans and the British are going to work together to do this, and they're going to find ways to do this. Well, how is this going to happen in the American government? The Army and the Navy have very, very small intelligence operations, the best part of which are doing code breaking. The FBI's got a good intelligence organization, but it's aimed in the United States and to some extent Latin America since 1940. So there is really nothing that Roosevelt can hand this sort of covert action, subversion, sabotage, intelligence job to. And so he turns to Donovan again. And Donovan gives him a plan that the British have written. And Donovan has got an idea for an organization to do that. Roosevelt creates that organization. It's originally called it's called the Coordinator of Information, because remember, this is before Pearl Harbor, and our help for the British is still somewhat secret. Or at least this covert, this intelligence help for the British can't really be talked about. So this office is called the Coordinator of Information. After Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, we're attacked by the Japanese, but the Germans help us out by declaring war on us 4 days after Pearl Harbor. So now we've declared war on Germany, we've declared war on Japan, and we've got a two-front war. And OSS under Donovan is formed in June of 1942. Now that we're in the war, we don't have to be secret about the war effort here, and Donovan's organization can sort of come out from under wraps. It was working under White House auspices. Now it can be moved over to the Joint Chiefs and mostly the War Department. The Department of Defense isn't created yet. And so now it is a quasi-military organization, but it sort of starts out with General Donovan's vision here. He's made a general, he's back in uniform again, and he starts building this organization. So this is how he builds it. I wish I could make this a little bit bigger. Can you see that now? Can people see that organizational chart of OSS? How are we doing? Yes, you can see that? Okay. So
not anymore.
Not anymore.
not anymore?
Yeah.
All right, let me go back to it. This would, is that good?
Yeah, we can see it pretty good now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So as you can see, that is a very strange organization chart. Donovan he's a visionary. He's a charismatic individual. He's obviously personally brave and very innovative. but he frankly is kind of a lousy administrator. And so this is not really the way to run a railroad here. He's just got, if you look at this, this is not what you get in a Masters of Business Administration program. This is kind of an odd way to organize something. But if you look at the names on the organizational chart, you can see the variety of things that OSS is doing. Secret intelligence is foreign intelligence works. That's running spies out of stations like the one in Bern, Switzerland, which is neutral, which is headed by Alan Dulles. There's one in London. There's these stations in all sorts of different places, and OSS is running spies and agents out of them. Special operations is with the military. And that's guerrillas. That is covert action. That's the direct sabotage and subversion sorts of activities there. Research and analysis. That's obvious. That's the professors that Donovan has brought down to take deep looks at what, the German economy and the Japanese and so forth, and to learn about them and learn how to guide the war effort through analysis there, which is actually a pretty interesting idea. And it's very interesting how they do that. Morale operations, that's propaganda. X2 is a fairly secretive counterintelligence outfit that is looking for German spies and working very closely with the British in that. So it is it's a strange organization. It's doing a lot of different things. Donovan would sort of come up with ideas and he would hand them off to other people who would run with the ideas. And he would have to sometimes step in and clean up the messes that they made because they're a little bit over enthusiastic. One in particular, in Portugal, Lisbon, Portugal, which is neutral, the Secret Intelligence Office there, they were able to get into the Japanese embassy and come out with some code and cipher material here. They bring it back to Washington in 1943, and they say, this is really great. We can break Japanese codes with this. And they take it to the War Department, to the Army, and the Army says, we're already reading those Japanese codes. Now the Japanese will change them. You people are idiots and you are a menace to national security. And things like this, little shenanigans like this, kind of get a lot of resentment for Donovan and OSS. It has some success. Its analysts do a very good job, particularly in helping the bombing campaign against Germany. Some of its stations, like the one that Alan Dulles is running in Switzerland, do a very good job of bringing intelligence out. Some of its sort of forays into parachuting agents behind German lines to work with the French resistance do fairly well before D-Day. But some of the other things that it does, it's learning on the job, and they're not all that successful there. So it's kind of a mixed bag. All right. So in the interest of time here, I've lost a little bit with my presentation. I want to tell you a little bit about what happens to OSS. With the end of the war in the middle of 1945, OSS is a war agency, it's created under special circumstances by Congress. And so if there's no more war, there's not that emergency there, its appropriations dry up. And that is what's going to happen here. And so the administration realizes they've got to, the administration, which is now run by President Harry Truman, realizes they've got to demobilize and they've got to get rid of a lot of these war agencies, OSS being one of them. It's got about 13,000 people in it at its peak, and most of those people are going to be demobilized. General Donovan works with the War Department after he gets this sort of death sentence for OSS in September of 1945. And they are able to take pieces of OSS, like the Secret Intelligence Office and X2, and bring them over into the War Department and keep those stations and those counterintelligence specialists alive and working. The rest of it is demobilized. The research and analysis branch is sent to the State Department, but the State Department doesn't like that, forgets to pay the analysts, and so they go home to their universities. So most of OSS, all but maybe 1,000 people or so, are demobilized. They're sent back into the civilian economy, which is what most of them wanted anyway there. However, a couple of important things. Many of the Army officers who would come in go on to work with, they go back into the Army and to some extent in the Navy as well, and they take some of the skills that they learned in guerrilla warfare and sabotage and subversion into the armed forces there. So this is on the left, you see that lance head insignia, that is OSS's insignia. It's copied by our modern Special Operations Command, almost unchanged. It's almost exactly there. So if you go to US SOCOM today, they're using an OSS insignia because OSS is what inspires them. Parts of OSS also eventually become parts of CIA. And so the picture here with the gate and the buildings, that is OSS headquarters. That's right beside the State Department in downtown Washington, D.C. And you can see the CIA seal there on the gate where the CIA has just moved into OSS headquarters. And there's the modern CIA seal as well. So Donovan goes back to law practice in Britain, and then he goes on to be ambassador in Thailand, which is his last job. I think he died in 1957 or so. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. All right, so quick recap on OSS. Now you kind of know what we're talking about there, and you get an idea when Melissa was talking about the special operations people and the communicators training at Fort Prince William Park. Now you know what they're talking about. These are the sort of the people that they're going in that OSS is going to send out to Europe and to Asia for the war effort. So I'll finish there, and I look forward to our presentation on Gustav Hilger and on also to taking your questions as well. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'll be quiet from this end.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for that fascinating presentation. I'm sure our audience has many questions for you. If they do, I encourage them to please type them into the Zoom chat feature. And in the final segment of today's seminar, Melissa and I will select from them and ask them of Dr. Warner. Now, though, we are going to present our next panelist, Jörn Happel, who is going to discuss Gustav Hilger. In 1945, American intelligence officers described him as, quote, a living encyclopedia on Russia and Russians. Later, an American official remembered him as, quote, a fine gentleman and a representation of, quote, what was good in the German people, end quote. His name was Gustav Hilger, and for 9 months after VE Day, he lived at Fort Hunt. During World War II, Hilger was an important German diplomat to the Soviet Union. After his time at Fort Hunt, Hilger worked for the State Department and lived in Washington, D.C. He was never prosecuted for war crimes committed during World War II, but America's post-war collaboration with former Axis officials was controversial even at the time and remains so today. What can the life of one man teach us about the history of the United States, Germany, Eastern Europe, and the world during this chaotic period that followed the Second World War? Joining us from Kiel to teach us more is the world's leading expert on Hilger, Jörn Happel. Dr. Happel is the director of the Professorship for Eastern European and East Central European History at Helmut Schmidt University in Hamburg, Germany. His research interests include the history of Russia, Central Asia, Siberia, and Poland. Dr. Happel's research on Eastern Europe and excellence in teaching have both been recognized with prestigious awards. He is the author of The East Expert, Gustav Hilger, Diplomat in the Era of Extremes, published 2018. We're very grateful to have him for not just the first, but the second time. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise. Here he is, Jörn Happel.
Thank you, Daniel. I really like to be in Fort Hunt, and I really enjoyed it the last time. And I'm dreaming to come physically to Fort Hunt to have a look where Gustav Hilger lived for some months and where he and his wife were freed after the Second World War. want to share with you some photographs of Gustav Hilger acting as an Eastern expert or an expert of the East in the incredible years between the First World War and the beginning of the Cold War. For George Kennan, you all know George Kennan, Gustav Hilger was the doyen of all Russia experts. Born in Moscow to a German merchant family, he made a name for himself after the First World War. First in Berlin, then in Moscow, and then in the United States. Among Germans for his efforts in repatriating prisoners of war, and among the Bolsheviks for the humanitarian work against famine. A career changer, he entered the Foreign Office and served the National Socialists, the United States, and the young Federal Republic of Germany under Chancellor Adenauer as an advisor, until figures like him were replaced by academically trained Sovietologists. I even believe Hilger would have been glad to see a successful Soviet Union because he was proud of Russia in his own way and loved the Russians, wrote the German diplomat Hans von Herwarth about his colleague. For Stalin's interpreter, Valentin Berezhkov, Hilger looked like a Russian. Many people saw Gustav Hilger. One moment, next page. You see Gustav on the left as a child in Moscow in 1888. Many people saw Gustav Hilger as a Russian. This was by no means wrong. Born in 1886 into a German merchant family in Moscow, Russia was his homeland and Germany his fatherland. He spoke German with a very slight Russian accent. Until 1941, Hilger only lived abroad during his studies in civil engineering from 1904 to 1908 in Darmstadt, in Hessen. After his studies, he returned to Moscow and worked in a Moscow factory producing fittings. In 1912, he married Gustav. This is in Darmstadt, but this is more important. This is the photography of the wedding. He married Marie. She was called Mary Hackenthal, the owner's daughter, a very rich daughter, I have to know. During the First World War, he was interned as a German. He was suspected of espionage during the First World War. And in the camp at Totmar, you see the Hilger family and the sons and the brothers and of Hilger's father in Totmar. In the camp at Totmar, it's in the northern part of Russia, Hilger worked as an interpreter for the Swedish Red Cross and coordinated relief measures for the internees. After the October Revolution, back in Moscow, Hilger organized various relief transports for the Swedish consulate. This was, in a sense, the beginning of his diplomatic career. After the Peace of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918 between Soviet Russia and Germany, he mediated between official German bodies and the Bolsheviks. He got to know Karl Radek and came to appreciate him. Karl Radek was the international spokesman of the October Revolution and a friend of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Hilger benefited from the fact that the Bolsheviks trusted him, having come to know him as a reliable partner. The imperial government in Berlin also took note of these successes. What spoke in his favor for work on behalf of Germany was not only his knowledge of Moscow and Russia, but also the fact that he was not a communist. For this reason, the imperial government entrusted him from 1919-1920 onwards with the repatriation of prisoners of war. Hilger proved himself in Moscow as an organizer and communicator. Within a few months, Friedrich Nansen had taken notice of him. In addition to his previous functions, Hilger now also worked as a member of the Nansen Relief Organization. He helped millions of children, Russian children, which were starving by hunger. Hilger had viewed the Tsarist Empire You see that his daughter and his son were both born in Moscow in 1913 and 1915. Hilger had viewed the Tsarist Empire as being in need of reform, socially unjust, and economically poorly positioned. He sympathized with left liberal forces, and so he sympathized with the Bolsheviks too. He wanted to a new Russia. He did not dream about a Soviet Russia. He wanted a Russia for where the people could live equally and friendly together. He acted as a door opener and repeatedly as an interpreter. He apparently had no reservations about engaging with anyone. Hilger guided left-wing German politicians as well as right-wing German military representatives through the Soviet Union. He privately housed numerous visitors to the Soviet Union of varying political persuasions. The Bolsheviks exploited this to establish contacts with German bodies through Hilger. From 1920 and into the 1930s, the home or dacha of Mary and Gustav Hilger all too often served as a venue for nocturnal conferences. This is the summer house of Hilger in the near of Moscow, the dacha. After the Treaty of Happel in 1922, the new German ambassador to Moscow, Ulrich Graf von Proctor-Franzau, requested that Hilger be accepted into the regular diplomatic service. The ambassador wanted someone the Bolsheviks would trust and who could prepare him for encounters with the Kremlin leadership. While Hilger came and went as a trusted figure among various Soviet diplomats at the Foreign Commissariat, he aroused doubts in the Soviet Secret Service. Felix Dzerzhinsky, the founder of the Soviet Secret Police, the CK, accordingly determined in the summer of 1925, I quote, "Hilger is our direct enemy." By this, he meant Hilger's knowledge of the Soviet Union, his uninhibited manner, his naive yet sociable way of obtaining information by the simplest means. During the Great Terror in the 1930s, almost all of Hilger's Soviet friends, including Karl Radek, were convicted and murdered. The Soviet Secret Service succeeded in intimidating Hilger through harassment. In 1938, he confided to a friend that he feared for his own life and that of his family. In May, you see some pictures from the dacha. This is the embassy, the old German embassy in Moscow. In May 1939, Stalin appointed Vyacheslav Molotov as the new foreign commissar. Adolf Hitler wanted to know what this signified. Hilger had to travel to the Berghof. He briefed Hitler about the Soviet Union and warned the Führer, despite the purges and the shooting of thousands of officers, of the military strength of the Soviet Union. Hitler listened calmly. Once Hilger had left the room, Hitler exclaimed angrily, "This Hilger, he's half a Russian." Hitler had little regard for expert opinions. Hilger had expressed different views which did not find favor with the Führer. But the political leadership needed his contacts, his knowledge. His contacts and knowledge and his linguistic abilities. Hilger served as an interpreter at the Hitler-Stalin Pact in August 1939 and the subsequent Treaty of Friendship and Border Demarcation of September 1939. This is a scene, this photograph, before the German minister Ribbentrop in the center was going to the Kremlin to have these incredible communication about this so very worse contact, the Hitler-Stalin Pact. Hilger was the interpreter of this pact in Moscow, and he appeared in photographs standing next to Stalin or between Molotov and Hitler. Both German and Soviet politicians were convinced of the quality of his interpreting. Even Stalin was now convinced of Hilger's worth. The dictator joked in 1939, I quote, Ambassadors and ministers in Moscow came and went, but Gustav Hilger stayed. A friendship even developed with Foreign Trade Commissar Anastas Mikoyan during the intensive negotiations between September 1939 and June 1941 was developing. Although Hilger despised Stalin and his followers who were responsible for the death of his friends, he fought for peace between Germany and the Soviet Union. When the German ambassador to Moscow, Graf von der Schulenburg, you see him on the right side on this picture, on this photograph, he was killed after the plan to kill Hitler in 1944. He was one of the men who stand behind Stauffenberg, perhaps you know him. When Ambassador Schulenburg informed him that Hitler wanted to go to war against the Soviet Union, Hilger was prepared to betray his fatherland. Together with the ambassador, he did it. But the Soviet Foreign Commissariat did not believe the statements of the two German diplomats. During the war against the Soviet Union, Hilger worked as an advisor to Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop. He had become a different person in Berlin, more reflective, but also determined to fight against Stalinism. He and his wife Mary had not only lost their homeland, their Moscow, their Russia. At the end of November 1941, their son Andrei, he was called Andrei in the family. He was born in 1913 in Moscow. He died as a German officer in 1941 in the near of Moscow. He has fallen as a German officer before the gates of his hometown. But Ribbentrop, the foreign minister, no longer listened to Hilger after the latter had repeatedly advocated sparing the civilian population in the occupied territories and treating Soviet prisoners of war more humanely. Perhaps you know that 3.5 million prisoners of war from the Soviet Union died in German camps. It is terrifying. In Hilger's view, the war was no longer winnable from the German perspective after the defeat at Moscow in December 1941. The foreign minister therefore banned his advisor from giving further advice. At the end of the Second World War, Hilger was a broken man. He had lost his homeland, his son had fallen, his wife, daughter Isika, and 2 granddaughters were living near Berlin. His son-in-law had been abducted and murdered by the Soviet military administration. In Salzburg, Hilger went into American captivity in May 1945. The officer who conducted the first interrogation noted that a significant Russia expert had been captured. Hilger was immediately brought to his trusted acquaintances, whom he had known from the 1930s in Moscow. Charles Thayer, David Clinton Poole, Charles Bohlen, and George Frost Kennan. Like German General Reinhard Gehlen, Hilger received very favorable treatment. In the autumn of 1945, he was flown out to the United States to describe his experiences with the Soviet Union in great detail to the US ambassadors, to the Americans. This is a picture Molotov and Hitler and the Reichskanzlei in 1940, and the interpreter Hilger in the center. Here you see Hilger in the center interpreting Molotov and German Minister of the Interior Frick. This is a photograph Hilger explaining some things to the Soviet interpreter Vladimir Pavlov. On the left you see Vyacheslav Molotov, the Soviet Ministry of the. This is forehand. The Soviet Secret Service learned of this activity. In response, it arrested Hilger's wife, Mary, in the summer of 1947. It was the US administration and it was the US Secret Service, Michael knows it better than me, I think, who freed the wife of Hilger's wife and the daughter and the 2 granddaughters with an operation called Fireweed. It was a very dangerous operation, but it came to a good end. So the Hilger family was reunited in Western Germany in 1947, and they both came to the US and Vorhand in Washington in 1947. In the immediate aftermath of the war, the United States was short of Soviet Union experts. The future US ambassador, John Gunther Dean, who was then working as an interpreter, described Hilger's contribution. I quote, "Gustav Hilger was the most knowledgeable man with regard to a country about which we knew relatively little. He expressed very balanced views. He also tried to explain why the Russians did certain things and how they did them." In 1945, 1946, Hilger wrote dozens of reports, sometimes a few pages, sometimes up to 60 pages long. In these, he briefed the Americans on a wide range of topics: German-Soviet relations, coal deposits in the Soviet Union, the Russian Revolution, Stalin's health, ethnic minorities, the results of collectivization and industrialization, to name just a few of the dossiers. In 1953, after the death of Stalin, there was the possibility for the German Chancellor to get Gustav Hilger back to Germany, and then Hilger became an advisor of Chancellor Adenauer in Bonn. He went back. This is a photograph of his house in Washington, and this is Mary and Gustav in Washington, and this is 1953 in Germany. Hilger's main task was to advise German foreign policy. Gustav Hilger spent his entire life explaining the Soviet Union. He represented a type of Eastern expert who had the opportunity to move into diplomacy as a career changer from outside the field. These individuals were not trained in political theory or comparative government. They practiced the right policies intuitively because they were willing to engage with the political practice and language of the Bolsheviks. Hilger influenced many Soviet experts with his knowledge and his stories. His oft-repeated advice that one must acquire knowledge on the ground could be followed after 1945 by only a few of his colleagues. He himself looked sadly towards Moscow and recited verses of Pushkin out of longing. In 1965, he died in Munich. This is the last photograph at the left, and you see him on the right reading the Pravda. The Pravda lies on the desk before him. So thank you very much to share my thoughts on Gustav Hilger with you, and I hope I can stop this. Cool. So let's start the discussion.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much. I'm sure our audience has many questions. And again, I'll encourage them to type them in the chat. We'll give them a little bit of time to stir and to think of questions, and start with questions for Dr. Warner, which Melissa will handle.
Hi, Dr. Warner. We have a few questions in the chat. The first one was from Pierce Connolly, and he asked, what was the biggest thing that the OSS did?
Biggest thing that the OSS did? That's a very good question. I would say the thing that they did that was the most long-lasting was that they showed a way for America to build an intelligence, a capable, trained, professional intelligence agency that was outside of any one department. Remember, we had War Department had intelligence, the Navy had intelligence, the FBI had intelligence, the State Department had its diplomats, but the American system, the American system sometimes finds it hard to bridge policy and intelligence and thoughtful choices across those various departments, those sort of departmental silos. And OSS did that. As I said, it didn't do it directly, it didn't do it. I mean, its wartime successes were fairly modest, although there were some important ones. But what it did is it showed people in Washington that there's another way that we can build intelligence. And so we're coming out of this huge war. We know because it's now the atomic age. We know because we have this huge, unknown, strange, mysterious opponent now called the Soviet Union, that we need a much better intelligence system. And so OSS gave the Americans a model for doing that. The CIA is something of an inheritor of OSS, although it's not exactly the same thing, but it gave people ways to think about this and ideas for what to do and what not to do as we're modernizing American intelligence for the Cold War.
Awesome, thank you. And then there was also another question in the chat from Philip Tommen. He asked, was OSS research and analysis directly involved in the strategic bombing survey?
Not in the strategic bombing survey. The strategic bombing survey is post-war, where the War Department, the government, they're trying to figure out what was the effect of strategic bombing in World War II. I don't know if any OSS analysts were on the staff of that. If they were, it was not as OSS analysts, because remember, OSS was dissolved. And so OSS was pretty much gone before the strategic bombing survey could get into Germany to sort of really chart what had happened in the bombing raids there. But OSS analysts, just as a kind of a footnote here, OSS was cut away from signals intelligence. They did not get very much signals intelligence. That there were two exceptions to that. One was that counterintelligence unit I mentioned, X2. The other one was some of the analysts who were working in London, because OSS sent research and analysis analysts over to London. And they were given signals intelligence. They worked very closely with the British to sort of understand what the bombing was doing to Germany and to try to help guide the bombing effort, because the Air Force, the Army Air Force, got to England with this idea of strategic bombing against Germany, but really did not have the intelligence organization to provide that intelligence. They relied very heavily on the British, and also ultimately on these OSS analysts. One of those analysts was a guy named Walt Rostow, who would go back to Harvard, I think it was, and would come back as the national security advisor under President Kennedy and President Johnson. And he helped guide the strategic bombing of the Vietnam War using some of the lessons that he had gotten from OSS. But of course, Vietnam's economy is different from Germany's, and their war aims were different from Germany's, and so forth. So the parallel didn't quite work out the same way as it had in World War II.
Awesome, thank you. And then I have one question of my own. How can we find out more about the Office of Strategic Services and the OSS? And do you have any reading or recommendations?
Well, this is an interesting point here. This is the best overall book about OSS was written over 50 years ago. A guy named Richard Harris Smith. He's out in California, and he is a young man, and he interviewed a bunch of people, and it's a pretty good book, despite the fact that the OSS files were subsequently sent over to the National Archives, and they're there. There are lots of books about aspects of OSS. There are aspects. There's a book by Barry Cates about the analysts, those research and analysis people. There are biographies. Douglas Waller did one called Disciples, which talks about the 4 OSS officers who went on to run the CIA between 1953 and 1987. The last one was William Casey, President Reagan's director of Central Intelligence. So there are a number of books out there, but like I said, only one comprehensive history The others are only dealing with aspects, organizations or operations or personalities in OSS. But there is, if you go to the Wikipedia article on OSS, there's a lengthy bibliography there. So there's a lot of things that one can look at. There's also a handful of movies about OSS. I think one is 42 Rue Madeleine with, I think that had Jimmy Cagney in it, done about 1945, 46 or so. And so there are ways that people can get at this there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I will turn it over to Daniel, who can read questions for our other panelists.
Yes, I have a handful of questions. First, we'll ask a couple that I have, and then we have one in the chat too. First question, Professor Happel, that I think many people are just immediately curious to know. While working as a German diplomat, what kind of knowledge would Hilger have had of the Holocaust and other atrocities committed by the Third Reich, and would he have had any role in perpetrating them?
Thank you, Daniel. Hilger did know as a very high rank diplomat at the German Ministry of the German, how it is called, the near of the Minister Ribbentrop. He did know what was happening in the East, and he wrote. We know exactly because of his signature. He wrote the dossiers or the reports which were written by the Einsatzgruppen, who killed thousands of Jews in summer and autumn and winter 1941. But we also know that he was sharply protesting against it, but he did nothing to stop it, and he remained on his seat. He still wanted to stay as a diplomat. So he was part of the murdering German government, and there were other people like his friend Rudolf Nadolny. He was an ambassador to Moscow, and after Nadolny heard about the big starting point and the beginning of the Holocaust, he said, "I can't work for this government anymore," and he left the government. But it was won, and the many diplomats like Hilger, they remained in the government or in the ministry, and this is you have to criticize this, but for me it was important to know that he wanted to that the German war has to end in the East, and that with an end in the East, he perhaps hoped with Ambassador Schulenburg that there would be an end of the Holocaust, but I can't say it for sure.
So I believe Ribbentrop was tried and hanged at Nuremberg, and at some point his defense wanted Hilger to testify, and the United States said no. Basically, can you tell that story and give some more information about how that developed?
This is a fantastic story of there's the friend of the enemy of my enemies is my friend, and Hilger was captured by the Americans, and the Americans, the U.S. administration saw this Soviet expert, and the Soviets wanted to have him as in Nuremberg to testify there, and Ribbentrop also wanted to have him as a defendant, but the US government said, we do not know Gustav Hilger, and we have no Gustav Hilger in our row. And this was true because Gustav Hilger was renamed. His name was Arthur Letter and Stephen Holcomb. So they had no Gustav Hilger in Washington or in Fort Hunt. But this is not there are many examples like these, that the Soviet experts or other experts or people like Joachim von Braun, the man who built the moon record, They were needed in the US or the British or the French administrations, like in the Soviet administrations too. And so they were hidden, may I say this, in US, in Vorhand, or in other places in America. You can criticize this too, but it is fully understandable when thinking on the beginning of the Cold War, so that they hide the Soviet experts.
So about being hidden at Fort Hunt, one of our listeners had some questions about that. How long was Hilger there at Fort Hunt? Was he held there in custody so he couldn't leave, or did he have freedom to move around?
Then you are the expert for Forehand. I remember he was only half a year in Forehand at all, but I'm not sure. I think he was in 1946, 3 or 4 months, and then after that, 1947 again. Then could you say something about it? Do you remember it exactly?
I believe it's 9 months is the answer.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know about whether he was able to move around.
Yeah, he was able to move around.
Oh, okay.
He met many times with George Kennan in Washington and with Charles Bolin. And there was another friend, David Clinton Poole. He died very soon, but they had meetings at some place in New York and Washington and in other places. So he could freely move through the United States. It wasn't Gustav Hilger, it was Stephen Holcomb.
So about being Fort Hunt experts, there are some of us in the crowd I know who are going to be very, very interested in Fort Hunt stuff and will know this figure, but others may not. There was another man named Reinhard Gehlen who spent some time at Fort Hunt, and I'm kind of curious. Gehlen seems to have been very different personality than Hilger, different career, but there also are some similarities in their background on the Eastern Front during the war and some of the things they did after. If you can maybe, for people who don't know in the audience, just say a sentence or two about who Gehlen was. And then my question is, did he and Hilger know each other? Did they work together during or after the war? What was that relationship like?
They knew each other and they worked together during the war and after war. Reinhard Gehlen was a German general of the Abwehr. That means he was searching for ways to attack the Soviet Union behind the front lines, and he was the chief of the so-called Fremde Heere Ost, enemy armies in the East. So Reinhard Gehlen and his staff, everything knew about Soviet war, the Soviet war and the Soviet tanks and the Soviet tactics. And at the end of the war, Reinhard Gehlen and his team managed to escape from Zossen. This is in the near of Berlin, where the Oberkommando of the Wehrmacht was placed. And they managed to escape with all their documents about the Soviet warfare. And they escaped to Austria. And in Austria, in the near of Salzburg, they met with the US army and gave all their documents to the US Army. And Reinhard Gehlen was a free person in US during this starting point of the Cold War. And he was the man who was an advisor to the US Army and to the US Foreign Office. And after founding the Western German Republic, the Federal Republic of Germany, he was the founder of the German Secret Service, BND, Bundesnachrichtendienst. So this is a very important figure in the German history, and it's a very corrupt person, I think. I don't really like Gehlen, but who likes those people? I don't know. Nevertheless, he was very important to conduct the Soviet Union and the Soviet influence in Western Europe, and that's also important too.
Final question for you then. A lot of times when historians look back on these figures who were recruited to work for the United States during the Cold War via Operation Paperclip, there's a conclusion that even if one kind of ignores whatever ethical concerns or considerations there should be, just judged by the results of the work they did for the United States, it wasn't really worth it. So I've heard a lot of people say that about about Galen, for example. But Hilger, it seems like a lot of people say it's more of a mixed bag, that maybe he did do some things to help the US accomplish their geopolitical goals during the Cold War. How would you evaluate that? Do you think that Hilger was helpful to the United States during the Cold War? And can you maybe provide just an interesting example of that, if you have one?
Mhm. I think he was important because I have here some of these documents he has written for the US administration. There are reports about Beria's downfall in 1953, the causes of Germany's political failure in Ukraine. This is a report from 1949, the collectivization of agriculture in the Soviet Union from 1945, developments of the US SSR after Stalin's death, methods of psychological warfare to be waged against the Soviet Union, a very cool report from 1948. Observations on the collapse of the Hitler regime in Germany and the weak points of the Stalin regimes in the Soviet Union. It's from December 1945, and so on. I think these are very important reports for the US Soviet experts, because you do not have so many experts in the US at this moment. You have George Kennan and so on. But that's all. That's not all, but that's why Hilger is so important in this time. And Kennan was a friend of Hilger, and he lived with Hilger in Moscow together. And so this was a very good relationship that was at the beginning of the Cold War very important for the US administration, I think. Perhaps Michael has another opinion. I don't know.
No, I won't try to top that. That's very succinct.
Mm.
Jörn Happel, Michael Warner, thank you both so much for joining us. What a pleasure it's been.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for having us. All right. Good day.
Yes, thank you.
And to you, the audience, above all, thank you so much. You're the reason why we do all of this. Because it's 250 years since America's founding, we're hoping to do this a little bit more often than normal, a few more times. I believe our next one is scheduled for May 2nd. If it would help, you are welcome to write me. I'm going to put my email address here, and I can let you know about what's coming up, or you can suggest what you'd like to see. For anybody who's joining us overseas, thank you so much. God bless you. I wish you every peace and happiness wherever you are in the world. For those of us listening stateside, thank you. God bless you, and may God bless this country all of us are fortunate enough to call our home. Take care, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.